Okay, well, thanks for having us. The topic today is casinos as tools for economic development, and we tried to sort of twist the things that we've done for sort of a broader audience, or a broader geographic range, to think a little bit about Chicago and think a little bit in particular about the legislation that's being talked about in Illinois right now, and think about how it sort of fits with the things that are going on. A couple of sort of, get you started statistics about casino gambling and the size. In 1970, casino gambling existed in just 13 countries and was a $2 billion industry. By now, we're up to $125 billion plus. Gambling is in 130 countries and now 40 U.S. states in some form or another. The biggest sort of difference, I think, between now and then is then the question was always, should we have casino gambling or not? Now the question, the sort of answer to that question is, well, we do. Whether we should or not, we do. And so I think that it calls for sort of a different focus in terms of the kinds of questions that we ask relative to what we have. A little bit of history. In 1973, the only casinos in the United States were the ones in Nevada. Some Native American tribes started to play around with high-stakes bingo parlors in the early 1970s. Atlantic City legalized gambling and opened casinos in the late 70s, and then the Seminole tribe of Florida began to open a casino in 1979. This created a mess of legal battles, and some of the legal battles are fascinating and still going on today. The thing that really kind of triggered the wave of gambling expansion in the United States was the Supreme Court's California v. the Cabazon Band of Indians ruling, which essentially said that gambling is legal, that gambling is a civil issue, not a criminal one, and therefore tribes had the rights to regulate gambling on their lands, and so this sort of began this rash of expansion into Indian gaming, and this sort of, okay, now it's legal, we can take it out of tents and put it into real concrete structures and things like that. And at the same time, states said, well, if they're going to do this, then we should start doing gambling too, as sort of a reaction to that. So gambling takes off right after that, and with the passage of the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, this sort of sparks the wave of innovation in the United States, and the world kind of follows along at roughly the same time. Not exactly. Some European countries, Spain, for instance, and Australia started to dabble with it perhaps a little bit earlier. But the first casinos were authorized in Iowa in 1989. Deadwood, South Dakota opened the first casinos. Iowa's opened a little bit later. Illinois opened casinos in 1991. By now, we're up to commercial casinos and racinos in 23 states. By commercial casinos, I mean non-tribal casinos. Or by racinos, I mean casinos and racetracks. We have tribal casinos in addition to those in 28 states. There's some overlap there, so in a grand total of 40 states we have casino gambling. A big part of, this is sort of an interesting way to kind of think about it. In 1989, we had about $8 billion a year in the U.S. in gambling, and very little of this was scattered in kind of small, fly-by-night tribal casinos, and there was hardly anything outside of Vegas and Atlantic City. Las Vegas and Atlantic City has grown essentially not at all since 1989 in terms of the volume that they do. Las Vegas has grown a little bit. The jump from 8 to 14 billion is almost entirely Las Vegas. The other U.S. commercial casinos and racinos are now about 2 times the size, and tribal casinos are about the same size as U.S. commercial non-Nevada and Atlantic City casinos. So we do about $60 billion in casino revenues, a little bit over $60 billion in casino revenues. When we measure revenues, we mean how much does the casino win. So this isn't revenues from food and drink. This is how much does the casino win. Casinos win about $60 billion a year. Most of the growth in locations comes from 1991 to 1996. Yeah, go ahead.
How much do the gamblers win?
The opposite of that, right? No, I mean, this is essentially the net. This is the adjusted gross revenue is the casinos, is how much the casinos wind up net ahead of the gambling. Most of the growth in locations occurs in the early 1990s. There was a really kind of a slow increase in the size of the spatial footprint of the industry from about 1996 until really right about the time the recession hit. In the last 4 or 5 years, things have gotten interesting again. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Maryland, a bunch of states are starting to look at gambling. Again, Illinois is thinking about expanding in a number of locations as well. Between 1996 and 2008, most of the growth it came from a couple of things. The first one was relaxing a lot of restrictions on existing locations. Riverboats don't have to cruise anymore. We allowed places to get bigger. We allowed them to put in different devices, different games, and things like that. The growth in revenues then has been relatively steady, but the growth in locations from 1996 until now has been fairly slow. Most of the growth came early. A little bit on literature on casino gambling. The first big study on the impacts of casino gambling was commissioned in the National Gambling Impact Study Commission report, which was commissioned in 1996 and released in 1998, and they came up with the call that is guaranteed to keep us academics employed. We need to do more research. So they also said, well, before we open any more locations, we should do more research, and I don't think that the reason why casino expansion slowed between 96 and, say, 2008 was because of the report, but the findings sort of match. There were an awful lot of academic studies that grew right alongside the industry. The number of academic journals with gambling or gaming as a primary focus has gone from 2 or 3 to 15 or so. This is just in the social sciences field. There's a rash of sort of medical journals and addiction journals and things like that that are interested in the public health aspect of gambling. The primary focus of most of the early studies was trying to identify whether casinos generate either net benefits or net costs. The benefits are, well, people like to gamble, and presumably we open up a product that provides consumers with more options that they like to do, then that's good. It might create jobs. It might create some economic development. It might create some benefits to local communities, and so increasing economic activity might be something that comes about because of casinos. Increasing social cost. We've got things like crime, perhaps, if people run up gambling losses and turn into pathological gamblers that turn to crime or turn to divorce or turn to suicide or run into other kinds of problems. These things are things that are social costs. And the general approach has always been, let's take all the things we can identify as benefits. Let's take all the things we can identify as costs, try to attach dollar values to them, and add them up and see whether we've got more benefits than costs. This generated a cottage industry of literature. In 2008, the Canadian Consortium of Gaming Research came up with what was probably the next biggest study since the NGISC study in the late 90s. And they titled it In Search of the Gold. It was a framework for understanding the socioeconomic impacts of gambling, and they called it In Search of the Gold Standard. They were going to try to find a framework that everybody could agree on that this is the way we should evaluate whether casinos provide net benefits or net costs. In 2011, the Canadian Consortium of Gaming Research, essentially in response to their massive 2008 study, said, we can't find it. There's a reason why it's hard. We'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later in the presentation, but it's hard. But their quote was, there's been considerable debate, the central issues being how to aggregate the social impacts with the financial impacts to arrive at an overall summative measure. There is no reliable way of doing this. I don't agree with them. I think there's a way of doing it, but it'll be imperfect, just like lots of things will be imperfect. But I think that there's a way, and I'll make a case for it a little bit later on. The hard part is that if we're going to create a list of benefits, create a list of costs, itemize them, put a dollar value on them, and add them all up, we have to agree on what the list should be. And we have to agree on how to measure, well, what sort of change in crime, for instance, did casinos cause, versus what sort of change happened in crime rates due to other things that happened in the area. And then once we do that, how do we attach dollar value to it? If I steal $100 from you, the cost to you is $100, but the $100 to me is a gain. Right? So when you think about sort of attributing costs, the cost of the theft, the right way to measure the cost of the crime, and I think that most economists and most people would say, well, no, there's other different ways that we should think about measuring costs. But these are all hard problems. These are all very, very hard problems. To look at an itemized list is a very difficult problem. We do so. We try to do so. We try to do this with other kinds of things that affect quality of life. We try to evaluate what's the cost of putting a garbage dump in my backyard, for instance, or burying nuclear waste, or what's the cost of being next to a prison, things like that. We try and do this, and we can do that in economics, but the approaches that were taken in the gambling literature were, there was never anything approaching a consensus. So, where do we go? The first thing that I would suggest is that what we ought to do is shift the discussion a little bit to whether or not we should open more casinos, or whether or not we should, but to say, if we are going to, and empirically we have, so whether we should or not is kind of an academic question. But if we're going to, then we should start to think about how. Where should we put them? Should we open a number of casinos, a number of small casinos in a spot, and have them compete with each other? Should we keep them the purview of Native American groups and tribal things? Should we make them on riverboats? Should we put them near each other? Or should we put them far away from each other? Should we make them small? Should we make them large? There are all kinds of interesting questions that we can ask, and while it's hard to answer the question, is casino gambling expansion a good idea? It's much easier to say, if we're going to do it, where and how should we do it? And that's part of what Ryan and I are sort of interested in thinking about now. Two fundamental questions that I always sort of walk away being left with. Why do we want to do casinos as an economic development strategy? The first one is they raise lots of tax revenue. They raise a ton of tax revenue. The sales taxes raise county taxes up to, we're in Cook County, which is about 10%, maybe a little higher. Casinos take 50 cents on the dollar at the high end. At the margin, they take 50 cents on the dollar from the marginal casino at Rivers, or from the marginal gambling loser at Rivers. So moving from a 50% tax rate on dollars that come in, from a 10% tax rate on the money that may have been spent in movie theaters and restaurants, perhaps, is a very big shift of revenues into the public coffers. Right? So relatively, they're easy to tax, and easy to tax at a very high rate. They generate a ton of tax revenue. The second question, and the second thing is, well, we do these to improve neighborhoods. We take places like Joliet, we take places like Elgin, and we say, well, these are places that are struggling, ex-satellite cities that are running down, and if we put a casino there, can we create some jobs, create some economic activity, create some place where people want to go and drive other sorts of business? And so these are the two questions, the two kind of economic development questions that I think most people are left with in speaking in a broad brush. So our interest is in thinking about rather whether to how. We want to ask two questions. One is to say, well, which areas raise the most tax revenue? Where can you put them to generate high levels of tax revenue? And then the second one, which areas might benefit the most in terms of economic development? To give you a little bit of a sneak peek of where we head, they don't always overlap. Right? The answers to these two questions can be very different in some fundamental ways, and hopefully we can talk a little bit about how. I turn things over to Ryan for a while now, but I'll stop and ask for comments or questions if anybody wants to jump in. All right, I will turn things over to Ryan.
How do you move this down
Or space one.
Okay, so I'm the revenue guy. Mike's going to address the second bullet shortly. So, I guess what I'll be doing is kind of talking about the potential revenue outcomes by ranking different parts of the state in the metropolitan area with regard to where new casinos should go if we are going to have an expansion. Today's casino landscape in the region, I've got my little red dots. These are all pre-existing Illinois casinos. So I've got the two Joliets, the Aurora, Elgin, Des Plaines, East Peoria, Rock Island, Alton, East St. Louis, and Metropolis. And in hindsight, I should have given you guys more historical data, but between 2011 and 2012, we see that the revenue generated from these casinos, and this is AGR revenue. So this is the tax revenue that the casinos generate for the state based on the amount of win that they generate, plus admissions tax. Casinos, I think it's like $3 per turnstile turn they give to the state. So added together, they've generated about $570 million in change in 2012. That's up from about $490 million in change from 2011. It's a big jump in revenues, primarily because of the opening of the Rivers Casino. Patronage has increased as well, about 10%. About 16 million people visit Illinois casinos within a given year, and that's growing, again, primarily because of the Rivers Casino opening so close to O'Hare Airport in Chicago. This is that win number that Mike was talking about earlier. So this is the fraction, not the fraction, excuse me. This is the amount of money that the casinos keep for themselves after paying back gamblers their own winnings. So in Illinois in 2012, that was about $1.6 billion, and that generated about $570 million in tax revenues, which in terms of the Illinois budget, it's not pocket change. It's not this huge percentage of Illinois' tax receipts, but it's not it's not something to ignore either. It's about 1.3% right now. So this is enough to fund 1 or 2 public universities. Breaking it down a bit further, by casino, you get a big mix here, and I guess look at Des Plaines, which is the new one here. It saw the biggest jump in taxes generated from the state, primarily because, and that's why I have this asterisk here, because it was only really open for about part of the year in 2011. So that 200% jump in revenues generated from the state is a little bit unclear. But you see what happened to Elgin, and you see what happened to Aurora. So we're talking later on about the so-called cannibalization effect that arises when you open up casinos in a dense metropolitan area. And this is a big concern to policymakers because, when talking about the optimal location to place a casino, your ultimate goal is to place it somewhere where it's going to generate the most tax revenue, the most jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what we oftentimes forget to account for is that there will be kind of these reverberating effects on out-of-state casinos, such as those in Hammond and East Chicago, as well as in-state casinos such as those in Aurora and Elgin. And if we don't account for those, and if we can't measure those effects accurately, we may make mistakes. But for what's going on down here, when we look at the state's other casinos, it's kind of a mixed bag. East Peoria was pretty much flat for those 2 years. Alton, which is by St. Louis, was down. That may have been because of an opening of a St. Louis casino. I know that St. Louis has had a small expansion as well, but I can't be sure when. Metropolis, it's growing, but it's not going too rapidly. East St. Louis is flat. So, but for Rivers, it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of the most recent performance of our casinos. Talking about the most recent expansion plan that I've seen, kind of what's been talked about, is this SB 744, which I think was passed in 2011, and then it kind of sat idle for a while, and then it was kind of rebooted and tweaked a little bit, and it hasn't gone anywhere, clearly. 5 new casinos, one in Rockford, one in Danville, and I'll show you where those all are shortly, if you don't know. One in Park City, which is effectively Waukegan. One in the south suburbs within Cook County, though. They picked like 4 or 5 townships. I kind of ballpark it as Harvey, just south of the city. And then, Chicago. And the Chicago location is a little complicated because the city of Chicago is allowed to have its own land-based casino under this proposal, and the 2 airports can also have casinos. And they kind of limit how many positions the entire city can have altogether, but the city has a lot of freedom in terms of how it allocates positions within its borders. So, in theory, this could be 3 casinos if you have one at Midway, one at O'Hare, and one at Navy Pier, for instance. These are just some major elements of the proposal. Currently, the Illinois casinos are limited to 1,200 positions. Now, a position is not quite the same as a gaming machine. The way that they measure positions, at least the way that they did it when I was at the state, was each slot machine, each electronic gaming device or EGD gets like 0.9 weight. And then each table game, like a poker table or a blackjack table, gets a weight of 5. So presumably because they can handle more players at a given time. So regardless of how a casino distributes it, they maxed out at about 1,200. They overwhelmingly distributed towards the slot machines. The new law would bump that up to 2,000 for each casino. But they had to pay for each extra position that they were to get. And then the Chicago casino would be kind of an outlier. They would give Chicago 4,000 positions. Again, to be distributed, where Chicago chooses, either at a land-based casino or between a land-based casino and something inside O'Hare, as well as Midway. So there are kind of some choices that Chicago would presumably have. Privilege rates, which are the tax rates that are levied on casino AGR, casinos win, will be changing a little bit too, and I'll show you kind of in the next slide, I think, how those are going to change. It's actually going to go down significantly, which is surprising. And the amount of money that goes to the locals is tweaked a little bit. Right now, and I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think it's about 5% of the AGR tax that the state gets redistributed back to the locals that house the casino. The way that the new bill is structured, 5% of the AGR tax receipts would go to the locals, and 3% of just the EGD, the slot machine AGR revenue, would also go back. So, given the fact that EGD win is a large fraction of a casino's overall win, we're talking about something between 5 and 8%, maybe 7% of total AGR tax receipts are going to go back to the locals to help with their government coffers. And in the case that there isn't an actual incorporated city that houses the casino, the county itself just gets 2% of the AGR tax receipts. So those are kind of some of the big changes that were negotiated when SB 744 was put in place. So what I have here, now actually my next slide is going to be a bit more clear. So let's kind of ignore this map for now. But what I did here was I just put those blue shaded areas where the proposed locations would be. Here are the tax rates as they are currently. That's the orange, which is the marginal tax rate on casino AGR. Starts out at about 11% up until about the first $25 million, and then it slowly rises. And as Mike indicated earlier, on the margin, and I think it's when you get to about $200 million and above, the marginal tax rate is 50%. So, as Mike made clear just a few minutes ago, there is a big concern that casinos take away from restaurants and movie theaters and bowling alleys and any other form of recreational entertainment that might be cannibalized. But those are taxed at a much lower rate than what some of these marginal tax rates could be. So from the state's perspective, casinos are a boom. The proposed legislation, however, really cuts those rates down a bit, and it really changes the whole trajectory too. For what reason I haven't really thought about too much, but it has something to do with incentivizing a lot of spending, I guess. I don't quite know why. But the red line is the tax rate on the win from table games alone. And you see that it kind of increases a bit, and it kind of maxes out at about 22%, then it declines above $70 million and stays at about, about 12% now, maybe about 15%. for anything above $70 million. And for slot machines, it kind of follows the same path for a while, and then kind of continues on, but again, at a lower rate than it is currently. And then after about $200 million, it drops pretty quickly. So, the stuff that I'm talking about in this discussion, doesn't really account for the fact that there could potentially be a countervailing effect from any expansion due to the fact that the rates would be so much lower.
If the goal is to maximize revenue to the state, why do you think the tax rates became regressive?
I don't know. I mean, to be honest with you, honest with you, I was putting this slide together last night, and I had no idea that they were tweaked like that. So I haven't had much time at all to really think about why. I mean, I don't know who was, in the back room, negotiating these rates, and presumably, some trade-offs had to be made. Some log rolling occurred. So who knows? But it's definitely something to look at in more depth, especially if this bill ever does go through. The actual locations themselves are a bit clearer here. So here's Danville, which is the furthest south of any of the proposed locations. Rockford's furthest west, and the second largest city other than Chicago that's proposed to get a location. Here are your Suburban townships. I guess it's 5 townships. And again, I'm kind of operating under the assumption that it's going to be Harvey, just because that's what I chose. And then Park City, which is really, really, really tiny, but it's up there by Waukegan, so it has the potential to capture a relatively large market up there.
Although they've changed the bill that now it just says Lake County, it doesn't say Park City.
Is that true?
Yeah.
So yeah, we should talk maybe, because I'm maybe a little bit behind, but it was Park
It
City.
does have it, yeah. No, it's,
And Park City's pretty close to Waukegan, so.
yeah, because they're trying to decide between Park City and North Chicago and Waukegan. There's a revenue sharing agreement between the different.
Yeah.
But it's
And well, as we'll see shortly, it's not really going to matter in terms of revenue impacts.
Right.
Where you put it. I mean, effectively, it's all Waukegan. No offense, if you're not, if you're from Waukegan or Park City. COGFA put together some estimates a while, I think in 2011, to kind of forecast what kind of revenues this would bring to the state, and they predict about $1.5 billion in one-time revenues, and this is money that pretty much would be coming from license fees, so some sort of operator, paying for a casino license, fees for pre-existing casinos paying to add more positions to their floors, and then about $500 million in annual receipts going forward. And that's kind of all they said. So I've got no idea what the projections are, 10, 15 years into the future. What bothers me about COGFA's estimates, and to be fair, I didn't spend a ton of time digging too deep, is that I really don't know how they derive these estimates. It's a little unclear kind of what they did. It's a lot of thumb in the air kind of thing, and I really don't. And they don't really spend any time considering alternative scenarios. So that's what I'm interested in. I want to know, regardless of these 5 casino locations that are being proposed, are they the best location that's out there potentially? What could we achieve if we spend some time focusing on the actual best locations as opposed to just these ones that have been kind of spoon-fed to us by the legislature? Now, that and the fact that I know from my own experience that state legislators and state agencies such as the Department of Revenue are extremely strapped when it comes to resources, when it comes to doing robust estimates of where to put these casinos. I was at the state Department of Revenue Research Division for 2.5 years, and there's some very, very skilled analysts in that office. But time is a really, really tricky factor here. you're always being pulled from one project to another project. When I was at the state, I was spending a lot of time working on this project to forecast casino revenues. And then, I was, constantly being pulled off that project and put onto a different project. And you can never really get the time to really just, do a really, really good analysis. Clearly the state lacks financial resources and, expertise as well. I mean, there weren't a lot of, PhD economists on staff who, knew the literature well, could reference peer-reviewed work and, take those estimates and apply them to a statewide analysis. So that's kind of what I want to do. Right? I want to develop some real simple tools that are nested in, solid peer-reviewed research that can then be incorporated into some sort of a, quick and dirty analysis that would help policymakers, bureaucrats at the Department of Revenue, quickly predict what some of the best locations would be, and in addition to what some of the locations to avoid might be. Okay. Now quickly, just to kind of summarize what we do know about casinos, at least what we think we know. We know that casino size matters. Okay? So, both of these papers, so this is my paper that's forthcoming in Growth and Change, and this is an older paper that is actually quite good. Both of them are exclusively devoted to studying the Illinois-centric region. We know that, as it currently stands, Illinois casinos are not at capacity in terms of market demand. If they were to raise the number of positions that they have within their walls by 1%, there would be a larger than 1% increase in spending. So one potential way to increase revenues for the state and to expand casino gambling isn't to have new locations, but to do what they proposed and just increase the size of these casinos. There's a lot of pent-up demand in the market for casino gambling. And if communities are uncomfortable about having a new casino put into their border, the state could find alternative ways to expand gambling and generate lots of money by just growing the size of the pre-existing casinos. And the market demand matters too. So as you might expect, denser, more heavily populated areas with more employment and more income tend to have more spending. Income's a bit tricky because there's always this question about, well, is it lower income households that tend to gamble more, or is it higher income households that tend to gamble more? What I find is that higher income communities tend to generate fewer gamblers, but those gamblers spend more. So it's kind of a mixed bag. We also have to take into account the cannibalization effect, the proximity to other competitors. So even if you have a great location and it's got lots of income to spend on gambling, has lots of people, and you can put a real big casino there, if it's really close to other pre-existing casinos, then you may cannibalize a lot of their revenue and end up washing it all out, or offsetting some of it. What we find in the literature, what I've found is that it's really new casinos that cannibalize other casinos. It's when you disrupt the spatial distribution of casino activity and make one casino more accessible for somebody that you cannibalize someone else's operations. If you just increase the size of pre-existing competitors, then casinos don't see a big drop in their spending. So again, another argument for why we might want to just expand pre-existing casinos. It might generate a lot of revenue for those casinos and not actually lead to a lot of cannibalization effects. And then price. The elasticity of demand for casino gambling is about -1. So if you raise price by 1%, you're going to see a drop in casino spending by about 1%. And we don't know a lot about price at the moment. We don't know where in the state casinos can support higher prices, where lower prices are needed, maybe because it's more competitive. The state does, and I don't have the numbers with me at the moment, but the state does limit the rate at which casinos can take from the gambler. For some reason, 10% sounds right to me, but I could be wrong about that. The average for 06 was about 7%. So when you talk about the win that a casino gets, in Illinois, in 06, which is the most recent data that I have in my database, every dollar gambled, the casino gives you back 93 cents and it keeps 7 cents. So, you know, if you keep spending that dollar, it takes about what 12 times until you lose it altogether. So that's how they get. So that's what we call their win. They win 7 cents on the dollar. So I'll be assuming going forward that they just win 7 cents on the dollar, but that could be tweaked with a more rigorous analysis. So to understand which locations are the most promising revenue-wise, I really need to do two things. First, I need to identify the empirical relationship between these factors, you know, income, employment, competition, price, and a casino's performance. And then I need to take those parameters and apply them to a region of my choosing. And with my knowledge of the region's characteristics, kind of back out how that region would do if it were to actually get into a casino. So the first step is to just run a real simple linear regression, where I've got an individual casino spending, so the spending at the casino, on the left-hand side, and I'm regressing that onto a vector of what I call X variables, which are characteristics that are unique to the casino itself inside its own borders or walls. So, you know, how many positions does it have? How many months of the year was it open? The price that it charges. I think that was it for what's going on inside a casino. And then I include a series of, there should be a plus sign here, excuse me. Oh, no, there is, sorry. It's a little, yeah, it's okay, excuse me. And then I regress, in addition to my X variables, my Z variables, which account for the economic environment surrounding a casino. And for me, the economic environment surrounding a casino is the activity that happens within 75 miles of that casino. So I run these numbers and I get estimates for, you know, these factors. And I don't have the actual estimates here because I thought you would not really appreciate them much because they're gobbledygook at the moment. But I can provide anyone with them if you're interested. The data that I use casino microdata, so data on individual casinos from 94 to 06. I don't have more recent data, and that's okay for what I'm doing here, but you know, going forward, it'd be nice to get some more recent data as well. And again, for the individual casinos, my X variables, I've got number of positions, number of months open within a year, which is really important for, you know, when casinos just open, and the price charged. And then in terms of the regional economy that the casino is kind of operating in, I include variables for the employment or the economic activity that surrounds a casino, the income levels, or really income per employee, which is the proxy for income per capita, number of competitors, the average size of competitors, and then some proxies for gambling limits.
Excuse me.
Yeah, please.
One of the issues that come up in the past in Illinois is that the revenue at casinos declines, all things being held. That's why every few years they had to.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a problem.
And therefore, why don't you include that in your model? Because that's
I've
an
got,
important factor.
You mean like time?
You know, also the fact is that the revenue is dropping.
Yeah, I've got time. So maybe so if you, maybe I wasn't as clear as I should have been. I do include casino fixed effects and time fixed effects. So I'm accounting. So these estimates that I back out a whole, you know, they account for time and they account for the individual casino effect. So, you know, I try to do the best I can. For what I'm trying to do, what's most important isn't so much the identification of the parameters. I'm really not so concerned if I get causal parameters. What I want is a high R squared, because I'm trying to predict. I'm not trying to predict or to take an estimate and give it some sort of causal interpretation. The R squares, and I don't report them here for these regressions, are about 0.9, which is pretty good for regression of this type with microdata. Quickly, when it comes to the way that I measure some of these Z variables, these variables that account for a casino's economic environment, I I only look at what's going on within 75 miles of casinos. So that's kind of how I define a casino's market area. And I give greater weight to activity that happens closer to a casino. So, if a casino is located, here, and there's a lot of employment here, and not so much employment here, I give more weight to what's going on here. Or conversely, if I got if I got one casino here in two equally sized regions, here and here, the closer region is going to get more weight. That's kind of how to think about it. Because presumably these people who live and work here, because of the shorter commuting time, commuting distance, will be more likely to patronize that casino. Same thing with the income numbers. Incomes that are closer to a casino get greater weight. Competitors get greater weight if they're closer to a casino, and if they're relatively close to regions that are of high weight, as are competitors of a certain size. And then I get those estimates, which are my gamma and my beta estimates, and I just plug them into the characteristics, the exact same characteristics that I measure for a particular location or region here. Now, when I do that, it just spits out some sort of an estimate of what kind of revenue or what kind of gambling would actually occur within that actual region, the actual location, given its particular characteristics. Now, the way that I'll interpret this is that the number that I get tells me the revenue potential of this location for a single new casino thinking about locating in that region. And I'm using zip codes as my locations. That's the finest geography that I could get at an annual basis. So policymakers are asking for things all the time. Every year they got new bills. Every 6 months they have new bills. And analysts can't wait every 5 years for the next American Community Survey to come out to give them new numbers. So zip code business patterns is a source of data that I use because it provides relatively fine geography on a very, very timely basis. And that's why I'm not using population, I'm using employment as a measure of density, because I've got employment from zip code business patterns, not population. That's why I use income per employee, not income per person. And all I do is for each zip code, I treat its centroid as the potential new location for a casino. So I give this location, okay, all of the characteristics of a potential new casino per the expansion bill's constraints. So I assume that we have a new casino here that has 2,000 positions. I assume it's open for 12 months. I assume that it charges a price of 7 cents per dollar spent. And then I measure the environment around it, up to 75 miles, as if it wasn't actually a casino, and plug those numbers into my parameters and get my actual estimates. So I could have done counties too. Here's zip codes. As you can see, zip codes just provide me with a finer level of geography. I get the exact same level of data for counties as I can for zip codes. I just like zip codes because they're geographical, fineness. So that was why I chose zip codes. Here's what I get for employment and income distributions. Again, these are weighted by distance. As you might expect, well, I tell you what I have here is I've got these shaded by quartiles. I've got 20 different quartiles here. I don't have the legend here, but darker zip codes mean that there's more employment or more income per employee. And as you would expect, it's the Chicago area that has the most concentration of employment surrounding any one given zip code, and the St. Louis area as well. And everything else in the middle is relatively low. When it comes to income levels, though, again, you have Chicago, you have St. Louis, Alton, East St. Louis casinos are already there, and you kind of have this strip through the middle that kind of runs through Peoria. Moline might be around there too, or Decatur. I don't quite know where Decatur is, but Springfield's in there too. So you do have that band running through the state, that also offers some potential for gamblers who have a certain income level. In terms of where the competition is, if you're concerned with avoiding competition or cannibalizing the competitions, it just depends on what you're interested in doing. Again, you've got a lot here because of the Indiana casinos and the Illinois casinos. You've got a little bit here because of the Iowa casinos, and then a lot by the St. Louis casinos. Notice that Danville is kind of on its own. In fact, Danville's always on its own, which makes me wonder why Danville was ever chosen. Probably to get some sort of downstate votes, right? But Danville's never really where you would expect it to, in terms of a high revenue generating location.
On the Indiana side.
I'm sorry?
I think there's some Indiana towns on the other side of the border.
There could be, but I should double check. When I put this map together, I was interested in finding casinos in other states that were within 75 miles of an Illinois casino. And at that time, well, even now, there isn't a Danville casino. So that's a good point. But that would make it even worse for Danville if there was a competitor there. So, adding competition without adding more employment or more income, it just makes things worse for Danville. So this is an upper bound in that case. But that's a good point. And moving forward, I should account for that. All right, so I take my estimates and I just rank them. I'm not comfortable yet with the actual revenue numbers. Forecasting is tricky. So what I'm going to do here is just rank each zip code from most revenue generating to least revenue generating. And per the bill, what I initially did was I gave all of the Chicago casinos 4,000 positions, because that's what the bill kind of allowed for. But what I found out pretty quickly was, well, that just gives all of the advantage to the Chicago casinos. So what I get when I do that is, again, you get kind of this central state area, which is relatively desirable. You get downstate, which will kind of by Carbondale maybe isn't so bad. Again, St. Louis, and then clearly the Chicago area. This isn't as dark as it really looks here. It's just that the zip codes are so close together, kind of the borders kind of blend together and make it look real dark. But all of my top 5 zip codes are all Chicago zip codes. And then ranking them from highest to lowest. So here, 1384 is the highest. So this is the most profitable zip code. I could have ranked it the other way and it would make more sense, but I didn't. So in Illinois, there are 1,384 zip codes, and Chicago is the best. Harvey ranks 1193, so that isn't really too far from the top. So that's not so bad. So I would kind of given these numbers, Harvey doesn't look terrible. Park City is not too bad either. Rockford's a little further down, but still way above the median. Danville's pretty low. Danville, and again, maybe even worse if I account for any Indiana casinos that are in the area. Danville doesn't seem like a winner to me, which might not be all that surprising to people in the audience. But but I thought to myself, well, this isn't really fair, because what I'm interested in is knowing what's the innate capacity for the region to generate revenue. You can put a 4,000 position casino anywhere, and it's going to win. So giving the Chicago locations 4,000 positions kind of weights things unfavorably towards Chicago. So I reran my simulations and gave all casinos just 2,000 positions. So everything was kind of on an even keel. And then things changed a little bit, not terribly, but enough that it's a bit more interesting. River Grove, Schiller Park, Menlo Park, Howard Heights, and this is basically O'Hare Airport here. So what you get is that everything around O'Hare really brings in the dough. If it was to be chosen by a single casino. And when you rank those against the 5 proposed locations, well, again, Chicago is still number 1. Harvey, actually these rankings don't change at all. So Harvey's still up there, as is Park City, Rockford's a little lower, and then Danville's still pretty low. But the top 5 locations would be somewhere near O'Hare Airport, which is nice because the expansion bill did allow for a Chicago casino if they could put by O'Hare Airport. and they even allow for slots within O'Hare. So, this isn't all that discouraging actually. Yeah, the fact that these rankings don't change. So the Harvey, Park City, Rockford, Danville rankings don't change. When I move the size of a competitor from 4,000 to 2,000. And that's because, per what the literature seems to suggest, that it isn't really the size of competitors that matters, it's where they are. So that isn't all that surprising. What other cities rank that you might be interested in kind of putting a casino? Springfield's pretty low, so it's about at the halfway mark actually. It's a little bit above Danville, but nowhere near Rockford. East St. Louis below Rockford, but so this would be what happens if you put a second casino in St. Louis. It's kind of it's about 2/3. Carbondale's kind of low, it's right by Springfield, which surprised me. I thought Carbondale might be a good location. Mike and I just put Cairo in there, or Cairo. How do you pronounce it? Is it Cairo? Cairo. So we put Cairo in there, really low, and Urbana is the lowest. So I don't know. But if I don't account for college kids, so I don't know if I can put in if I can account for their willingness to gamble, maybe things would change. I don't know. But this lecture series is about the suburbs. So and for the suburbs, I could talk about Rockford as a suburb, although it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I decided to kind of focus in and kind of recalibrate on the 6-county metropolitan area. Now the green here, in fact, I've got a better slide. Let me just this is a better slide. Okay. So the green here, so here's Park City. It's really tall, a small little town here. And here are our south suburb locations, and then your Chicago, of course. If I kind of do this in sequence, so if I place the best casino first, rerun the numbers to account for its presence, and then put the second best casino in its location, rerun those numbers, and do that 5 times, here's what I get. It's not exactly the same as it would have been if I just plopped everything in the number 1 spot, because that number 1 spot changes as you add more casinos, because the competitive environment changes. But even then, things don't change that much. So if you kind of focus in on where you want to be, O'Hare Airport, western suburbs, eastern part of DuPage County, northeast corner of DuPage County, Oak Parkish. I mean, it's not really Oak Park. I guess what's right on the border of DuPage and Cook. This is kind of where you want to be. So, excuse me?
Westchester.
Westchester. Okay, yeah, perfect. What surprises me is that actually, and you can't see it so well because I have this green overlay here, the south suburbs aren't so hot actually. Right within the metropolitan area. I mean, they are when you look at Illinois as a whole. But if you're going to focus in on just the metropolitan area, the south suburbs actually don't perform so well. I mean, Harvey's not the best place to put it. Neither is, Home and Flossmoor or any of these communities that are kind of in this general area, which surprised me. I mean, I thought because it is relatively dense down there and it is so close to, the Indiana casinos that they would do well. But I think that's the problem, is that they are close to the Indiana casinos. And even if you put a casino there, yeah, you're going to cannibalize a lot of their business, but those casinos aren't going away. They're still going to kind of take away from this.
But also close to Joliet.
Yeah, that's true. No, I mean, yeah, Joliet too. You're right. Yeah, Joliet plus the 4 Indiana casinos. So yeah, so there's 6 heavy hitters down there, I guess. So that's what I get for the metropolitan area, north of Chicago, northwest suburbs, inner ring suburbs. Now, what the state's perspective. So what I've just done is I've showed you what the best locations are from the perspective of an individual casino wanting to locate. But I don't say anything about what happens if I put a casino here. What does it do to Elgin? Because Elgin's probably going to lose out. So the net impact of putting a casino here isn't going to be as rosy as just looking at the numbers that the zip code itself tells me what's going to be generated, because there's some sort of feedback effect. So we need to account for some sort of cannibalization. And all I want to show here is, what happens to the revenues generated by each zip code when I put my casinos one after another into this map. And unfortunately, you can't read this legend here, but white zip codes mean that they didn't change very much. So their rank didn't change at all. Okay. So as you would expect, downstate Illinois isn't going to really suffer at all if you put a bunch of casinos up by O'Hare. So they're not going to suffer from any sort of cannibalization effect. So they're safe. Okay. Northern Illinois, and I got to figure out what's going on here, so let's just ignore that. Okay, but Northern Illinois, all of the 6 counties are gonna suffer from some sort of cannibalization effect, and that's going to offset some of these winnings. And I think that what I need to do going forward, and what needs to be done going forward, just in general, is that we need to kind of think about what is the magnitude of these offsets, and once we understand what those offsets are they enough to change where some of these optimal locations are? But it looks like downstate Illinois and western Illinois is relatively safe from this scenario that I kind of laid out. And I think that takes me to the end of my slides. Any questions at all about just kind of methodology or what I'm trying to do?
Yeah.
Oh.
How far away are you from finishing your work? It sounds like there's a lot of loose ends.
Well, yeah. So when Megan called me, this was an idea in my head, based on this article that I cited earlier, this growth and change article that's forthcoming. That hasn't even been published yet, and these estimates are kind of based on those numbers. So 6 months, give or take. I've only been really working on this. I mean, these maps haven't been in existence for more than 12 hours. So this is all very, very new numbers and very, very preliminary. But again, the goal is to prevent the state from making as large of a mistake as it could potentially make. So give them some sort of a guide. In general, it's not going to matter if you put it, here. I mean, but just to know that, Danville probably isn't the best place to put it, even if there's a lot of political pressure to put it there, that may, be enough to, make them get serious. I don't know.
How do you account for the non-residents, potential non-resident counties?
Especially by O'Hare.
Why don't we need to account,
By O'Hare or downtown, or,
so when I ran these estimates, I use actual revenue data from actual casinos between 94 and 06. So those numbers already account for non-residents.
Actually,
So they're, I'm sorry?
I disagree.
What do you mean?
Those are all the casinos in Illinois are drawing locally. All right, take Nevada, for example. All right, the casinos in the strip are 85% of their revenue is from non-residents. Henderson and Laughlin and Reno are 95% local. And so the difference is there. That's why you have a drop-off if you don't increase the number of positions over time. You're saturating the local market. So there's an issue of whether you've got
out of sample. So what you're saying is an out-of-sample estimate that I'm making. So you're saying that you're saying that the O'Hare airport is going to be uniquely different than any of the casinos that exist in the region, because it's going to draw a disproportionate number of out-of-towners.
People are stuck there, right? Or you do
because it's a convention set, it's a convention center.
Or you do a Navy Pier where you're going to get or right next to the apartment, but people walk off the convention floor, there are residents that are.
Even if it's 50%, and it may be higher, they were sold politically in this discussion as that a Chicago casino would have lots of things. The mayor was promising that they would keep local people out. Right? I'm not going to comment on whether that's feasible.
I was going to say, I have at least a healthy dose of skepticism that that's true.
Yeah,
I would
but-
encourage anybody who thinks that that's going to happen to walk through the doors
Right.
of downtown Detroit or New Orleans.
But I think the point is that any significant percentage changes your numbers.
Well, it would probably make the Chicago ones even more profitable.
All right.
So like Rockford's not going to be impacted by this.
Right.
Danville's not going to be impacted. Waukegan's not going to be. So we're talking about the Chicago locations are, if anything, going to have more
So
visitors
wouldn't
than
that,
more.
let's put it this way, then, wouldn't that give even more support to say, forget the rest of the state, put all the new casino positions within the city and the airports and leave it at that?
Again, my estimates are very, very preliminary,
If your
but
goal, if your goal
I
is to
get it's limited, it's
maximize,
still big picture,
if
that's.
your goal is to maximize tax revenue,
Yeah.
I would agree exactly with that.
Okay.
yeah, and
I
Mike's
agree
gonna.
exactly.
I mean, Mike's gonna Mike's gonna counter this with, you know,
How do we help neighborhoods?
yeah, more, you know, or place-based, yeah.
Damage
So-
neighborhoods less? I don't know.
Yeah,
No,
so
I
from a
would
pure revenue perspective, that's what I'm.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, build a big massive casino in Chicago and just wash your hands.
Well, that's a policy statement to me makes sense.
If that's the goal of.
But that's but we know that there's other issues at play, which is why Danville's even in the mix to begin with.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Well, you guys get some downstate votes, otherwise, no one's gonna, it's not gonna pass. So, I am naive to all of that, so that's why I just.
Is there any effort to determine what a gambler, what a profile of a gambler is? So for instance, you're using like population centers and
Yeah.
so forth, but,
I tried to.
it's like not everyone gambles. Who are those people?
Yeah. There's.
I wrote a paper some years ago on what are the locations that are most likely to attract casinos, and a lot of the stuff that went in there was demographic, race, age, income,
Religion.
things like that, religion, yeah.
There are surveys out there, but there are surveys about where you live, how far are you willing to commute, that I've read, and there are sources of data out there. Like there's the Consumer Expenditure Survey that might have some gambling stuff.
There's stuff out
I
there.
don't know if people have. Yeah, it's something that I've. But yeah, I think that's something that people should be spending more time researching.
What about video poker, which is like a casino at every corner?
Yeah, no, that's something that and that was part of this bill, the video component. I don't have that data, but and that's a whole other beast. Right?
Well, because intuitively, you could almost say video poker would destroy any concept of a regional casino.
I don't. But that's going to it's going to attract a whole different client. I mean, bachelor parties aren't going to just go to a corner bar. I mean, I think it's going to be a different.
Video poker is a different. No, I mean, there's stuff out there. Video poker is a different animal. Video poker is the people who are concerned about addiction. I think are far more concerned about video poker, and the evidence seems to suggest you need to be far more concerned about video poker and things like that than large casinos that attract people who are going to blow off steam and have some fun. Video poker. I've heard it, and I don't want to necessarily attach myself to it, but video poker is the crack cocaine of gambling. It's the way that it's been described, and I think that there's some truth to that. But it generates revenue. It brings in revenue, and again, there are two things. There are two things that do we want to help neighborhoods? Do we want to generate revenue? And if we want to generate revenue, video poker may be one way to do it. Ryan and I don't say much about that. Ryan and I talk about casinos, but all right. I will try to go relatively quickly. So if we can't, we talked at the beginning about this notion of constructing a bottom line estimate. Are casinos good or bad for local economies? And the hard part is, well, we need to get to some agreement on that. We need to agree on a set of costs and a set of benefits, a way to quantify them, put a dollar value on them, and add them up and see what we come up with. And that is incredibly hard. It is incredibly hard. So the approach that I've taken in a number of places is to say, well, what if we think about, let's look at what happens in neighborhoods. And the story goes back to a fairly long literature on hedonic pricing models and on quality of life models that look and say, okay, what happens to wages and rents and wages and land rents in a particular space? A place that is, and we'll split it into, the goal is to essentially say something like this. Businesses want to go where profits are highest. People want to go where their utility is the highest, or their level of happiness is the highest. Businesses would like to have low wages and low land costs. People would like to have high wages and low land costs, other things equal. But we move to affect labor supply and labor demand in ways that affect wages and rents in a particular space. So the story goes something like this. If you think about a random community, drop in the middle of nowhere and say, okay, what is the prevailing rent, the land rent, R, and the prevailing wage or income, W? And we consider what happens. If a place sits up and to the right of this, where they've got high wages and high land rents, that these are places that must be productive. Chicago, why would Chicago want to pick, or why would a business want to locate in Chicago if it's got high wages and high rents? Well, it must be productive, right? Alternatively, why would somebody want to go to here? And these places tend to be rural places. They tend to be relatively, it's cheap. I can buy a house in Danville for probably not much money, but I can't make much money there either. So at the margin, we shouldn't expect people to be happier in Danville than they are here. Alternatively, we can consider the decision of people, and people want to go here. Lots of income, low rents, other things equal. But these are places like, to pick a place that's popular now, North Dakota. You have to pay people a lot of money to get them to live in North Dakota and give them cheap housing, and we still can't seem to get enough people to North Dakota these days, right? These are places like San Diego and Honolulu. Wonderfully sunny. I have a friend in San Diego, and she tells me she gets paid in sun dollars. Don't spend quite as well as real dollars, but she gets to kind of walk out into 70-degree weather every day. So the question is, which way, when we put a casino in a location, which direction does it move? Does it make it more productive, improve the business climate? Does it make it a nicer place to live, give us more entertainment options, and the tax revenue gets poured back into parks and schools and things like that? Does it make it a worse place to live? A worse place to live, does it make it so that crime becomes rampant and pathological gambling is a real issue that affects the well-being of communities? Or does it make it a place that's unproductive? The casino essentially takes money out of the hands of lots of people and sends it to casino operators who are located in Las Vegas and around the world, while it takes money out of the hands of local residents, money that they would have been spending in restaurants and movie theaters and other places like that. So, does it spur business activity? Does it reduce business activity? Does it make it a nicer place to live? Does it make it a worse place to live? And so that's what I try to do. Okay, and we can sort of think about costs and benefits in that way. So what I do is essentially take a look at what happens. How do things move through this space? And I apologize that I have year 2000, that the study goes through year 2000. Year 2010, which is the last sentence, is a horrible time to study the housing market. I wish it wasn't, but it's a horrible time to study the housing market. So some of the numbers are going to be dated. They're going to be year 2000 values and things like that. Don't get tied to the numbers, but please feel free to get at least a little bit attached to the percentages if you want to start to think about things in today's terms. So we've got the yellow dots are all of the geographic area that I use is the public use microdata area. It's the census. It's a narrow geographic range in the census. Pumas are roughly the same size in terms of population, but can vary widely in terms of how much geographic area they cover. So they're about between 100 and 250,000 people, usually somewhere in the middle of that. But some of them can be very large. There are very few pumas in Idaho, for instance, but there are dozens of them in Chicago. So what I do is, this is a map that lays out what they look like, and you can see there's this kind of upward trend, and the black line represents something loosely approximating average from the perspective of residents. Right? Anything up this direction might be places that are less desirable to live, low amenity values. These are places where we might want to go. We would expect to find. Well, here I'll jump to the next slide. The next slide takes out all the yellow dots. So places that are less desirable, perhaps, are Rockford. Places that are more desirable. Let me pick one. I don't have a good example of the below crop. Danville's back over here. This would be downtown. And again, the dollars are $2,000, so try not to scale them too much. So what we're interested in doing is figuring out how things move. And so the research that I've done most recently says that it depends on a few things. It depends on casino size. It depends on how much gambling activity we generate. If we build a big casino, we're more likely to have a real economic impact in terms of direct job creation and spillover job creation if we're doing something that's relatively substantial in size. It depends on local population density. The more activity that is already there, the more we're likely to displace it. Right? It depends also on local market structure, and the way that I've talked about it here is I'm considering a single individually licensed casino that has a sort of, a sort of area, market area that is its own, that has a relatively, even a narrow one, but some kind of market monopoly on a certain region, a certain area. This is different, the different market structures that I distinguish are to consider gaming communities, or gaming towns, places like Biloxi, Tunica, which has a bunch of casinos in a same area. Places like Deadwood, South Dakota that has a bunch, there's 3 cities in Colorado that have 15 casinos on a strip. In Illinois we have isolated local monopoly casinos. So the local market structure matters, and then the other market structure is tribal casinos. I consider those as a separate story. And what we find is the following: that these things matter, and I'll talk about sort of 3 areas. PowerPoint does something strange. When I go from looking at the thing on my computer to the thing when it blows it up, it switches the direction of the arrows. But I'll try and walk you through this. A is where we start. So this is the location of a. This is the location of a typical commercial standalone casino. And the first move, the introduction effect, moves us from A to B. Okay? When we introduce a casino, when we take a community that had no gambling and we put gambling there, the initial effect is to make the region less productive. Then we start to build it and put some size to it, and the bigger we build it, we move it towards the more productive region. So putting it into an area is bad for local business, but if we build it big enough, we can overcome some of that. And then the last thing that matters is this density story. The density story says, well, this pulls us all the way back here if we put it in a very heavily populated area. Right? So introducing it, we get some cannibalization of local business. If we build it big, we might be able to create some new activity, but building it big in a densely populated area doesn't work as well as building it in a place that doesn't have much going on anyway, right? So why Danville? Because there's nothing else in Danville. I mean, that's the sort of short answer. Why, why O'Hare? O'Hare's got, look around O'Hare. Does O'Hare need economic development? Maybe it does. I mean, maybe there's things that we can extract out of people flying through O'Hare. But certainly the casino is going to crowd something out if we build it in a densely populated area. If we build it in Danville, perhaps less so. Okay, so we consider the following: the 4 outskirts proposed location, and then I messed around with a couple of locations. A location downtown, say Navy Pier, or in the Puma that covers Navy Pier. It also covers McCormick Place, so I can't tell the difference between those two. A south side thing, I picked where Michael Reese Hospital is because that's some place that people are always talking about. What are we going to do with Michael Reese? So that's what I picked. And then someplace near Midway Airport. And then I said, well, just for fun, let's try Springfield, because when I looked at Ryan's maps, there's kind of the blue section in the middle of the state, and so you can pick Springfield or Decatur or whatever. It's not going to matter much what you pick, or Bloomington Normal, perhaps. And then also Carbondale, Cairo, just because those were other things that were blue in Ryan's maps. Again, don't worry so much about the numbers, but worry about the percentages. And the impacts are pretty substantial. The impacts are pretty significant if we assume a brand new 2,000-seat casino. Now there's an assumption here, and the assumption here is that the local market can support a 2,000-seat casino, a 2,000 gaming position casino. If that's too much for Danville, then we back off on this. But the presumption is, and frankly, until fairly recently, this wasn't much of a conversation. It used to be you put a casino down and it fills. Till 3, 4, 5 years ago, cannibalization is a relatively new issue for people to be concerned about, and certainly by 2000 it didn't much matter. So let's go to the maps. So what happens? We start, and again I apologize, my arrows go backwards. They don't look backwards when I show. We start here. This is Harvey. Right? We start here. We introduce the casino. We build 2,000 seats in it. and Harvey is relatively dense, so the net effect is a move this direction. From the big dot to the big blue dot to the small dot, it'll move this direction. So it would generate some productivity benefits. This is the suggestion. It moves us in the direction of productivity, of positive productivity effects. We look at, what's the next one? The next one is Waukegan. Waukegan starts down here, we get the same thing. The introduction effect is negative, we build it, it kicks back. Those are two cities that are relatively similar in population density, so we should expect a relatively similar sort of effect. We get a positive productivity effect. We get relatively higher wages, relatively higher house prices. Rockford, Danville. Rockford is relatively dense. We get sort of the same story. We get an introduction is moves to the negative. We build it relatively big, but Rockford has a fair amount of people, so we get a sort of a modest positive productivity effect. But look at Danville. If you stare at Danville, the beginning, the red dot, and the end, which is up here, the productivity or the density effect is almost nothing. It's almost nothing. There's not much activity for it to displace. There's just not much to do there. So you get a much larger, a fairly larger impact on local productivity, economic development. But notice again that all of this is productivity. It's all moving us along in productivity. None of this is making it actually a better place. None of it's just making it busier. I'm nervous about talking about Chicago. I'm going to do it anyways because that's where we live. But I'm nervous about it, and here's why I'm nervous. If Chicago puts a casino downtown, this will be breaking new ground. There's nothing else in the U.S. like it if we put a downtown casino. There's not. There's 2 or 3 downtown casinos in Detroit. In Detroit, the downtown Detroit is not like Chicago. There's a downtown casino in New Orleans. Actually, I think there's a couple of downtown casinos in New Orleans. New Orleans is the only other place that's even remotely comparable, and New Orleans has about 7,000 people per square mile. Chicago, downtown Chicago, is about 12. Right? Detroit is, or was in 2000, about 5,000. It's hollowed out even since then. So we got about 5,000 in Detroit, about 7,000 in New Orleans, and about 12,000 in Chicago. No matter which Chicago location we pick. Right? Those are the 3 observations out of 350 casinos I have in my data set. Right? So there are 3 observations that get to 40% of the level of population density that we have in Chicago. So tread carefully. This is very much out of sample forecasting, or out of sample projection. This is not something that I want you to tie too much on. Nevertheless, we're going to do it anyway. So again, warning again, interpret with care. But I'm going to say this again: evidence and theory suggest that the quality of the business environment impacts will fall with density. So what do we get? What does the Chicago sort of picture look like if we tell? These are the two sort of out of downtown locations, and what we get is an introduction that's slightly negative. We build a big one. Chicago, we're talking about 4,000 seat casinos, not 2,000 seat casinos. We move over to here. This is a big productivity effect, but it's really dense. So we move essentially all the way back to where we started. The neighborhood effect will be, in fact, all the effects will be, there's a slightly positive amenity effect. We go a little bit down and to the right in that, but basically we go all the way back to where we started. The same thing is true in Midway, and the same thing would be roughly true if we do this in Navy Pier. Right? Again, maybe a slight amenity effect, a slight positive amenity effect, but it's really slight, it's really small. Mostly what we do is we kind of go right back where we started. So casinos don't, as far as I can tell, don't change things. Now, or don't change things radically. Now, I want you to kind of consider a couple things. The first one is if we make this a 2,000 seat casino, right? This line is half as long, but the density part line is still just as long. So if we make it a 2,000 seat casino, we go all the way back over here. If we don't build it big enough, if we essentially don't build it big enough to create, to be an engine of its own, then we wind up displacing a bunch of restaurants, taking a bunch of tax dollars out of the pockets of people who we hope are coming in as conventioners, but probably are not. Again, visit the one in downtown Detroit, visit the one in downtown New Orleans, and tell me if they're travelers or locals. I don't know, but that's the sort of notion of Chicago. Looking downstate, we'll just go straight to the maps. This is Springfield. Slight positive productivity effect on net. Carbondale, again, slight positive productivity effect. You can see there's no density effect. There's no people really in Carbondale or Cairo, so most of the activity that's generated is new activity. So what's the takeaway? The takeaway is if you want to generate positive business benefits, you need to build it big enough to do so. The benefits will be bigger if you build it in places where there aren't many other things going on. It doesn't have much of an effect either direction on quality of life, on household quality of life, which is maybe not a strong result for people who think that it's going to be wonderful for their communities, that the aldermen who are lobbying really hard to get, or state reps that are lobbying really hard to get in their neighborhoods, or the anti-gambling folks who are, it's going to cause crime and pathological gambling and riots. Yeah.
In Cairo, does it take into account like sort of like the, I don't want to call it metro area, but there's kind of like a strip down there of towns comparable in size, like Mount Vernon?
Cairo is in a different.
Paducah, Kentucky.
Cairo is a relatively big neighborhood. For the purposes of this, Cairo is however far you have to go around Cairo to get to about 160,000 people, which is far. In downtown, you don't have to go very far at all. So Cairo is a relatively big neighborhood. The paper looks a little bit at spillover effects to say, what about the places that are like in Chicago? What about the neighboring communities? Frankly, I don't say much about it because I think that there's room to do a better job with understanding the sort of spatial dynamics of things like that. My hope is that somebody will do that, but I don't.
What about the argument that if you take the casino in Chicago, you say, okay, anything in Chicago, the profit of the taxes will go to offset to help pay the schools, which then it really means it's a net. It's sort of like a discretionary income property tax avoidance. Does that make it any more beneficial?
It makes it more likely to pass the legislature and governments, I think. I mean, I think the political economy issue there is that part of the reason why we turn to gambling is because we can pass a gambling tax. We need to raise money somehow, and we can sell a gambling tax. So, gambling is a high tax. It's a high tax activity. Yeah.
So, if you merge your analysis with Ryan, what's the takeaway?
Well, whoops, one more slide up. A couple of things. Here's just to sort of summarize where I end up. The most development bang for your buck is if you build something that's sufficient size relative to your community. If you're going to do something relative to your community, you need to make it of sufficient size. There's very little, and again, I warn you again, there's very little evidence about the economic development impact of what happens when we put casinos in big cities. Detroit is a bad case, and New Orleans is really the only other one. This will change going forward because Ohio now has more urban casinos, and Pennsylvania now has more urban casinos, and Maryland has more urban casinos. So we may be able to look up in 5 years, and I expect to, and see what happens, right? See what happened in those three places. But until fairly recently, there's just not much evidence.
St. Louis isn't big enough either to even look.
Yeah, well, St. Louis is smaller than I'm trying to think where St. Louis came up. St. Louis is somewhere between like 2,000 and 4,000 people per square mile.
Right.
St. Louis in density is really,
No one looks out there.
yeah, I mean, it's not that much different than, St. Louis is kind of like Detroit in terms of population. You've got relatively dense suburbs and not so much where the casinos are. Note that revenue, the size here is measured in gaming positions, but contra Ryan, revenue, what we might really be interested in is can casinos actually support these numbers of positions going forward, and I don't know the answer to that. And then Ryan adds the following. From the perspective of an inner city, if the goal is to raise tax revenues, I'll paraphrase, if the goal is to raise tax revenues, put them all in downtown Chicago. If the goal is to do economic development, Chicago probably doesn't make quite so much sense, but we note this. Given our concern about cannibalization, expansion of pre-existing locations may be the better way to proceed, rather than thinking about developing a bunch of new places. If our concern is cannibalization, growing what we've got may be a better way to proceed. Talking about racetracks, for instance, as a place that that lots of states have turned to. We already get gambling and racetracks, so put casinos in there, and so that's it. Yeah.
Have you looked at all of the effects of like those community agreements and community benefits agreements on this? Because I know there's like when Rivers opens, there's an agreement that forces the city to give up a lot of its revenue, A, to the state and then to other surrounding communities, and it's probably likely that that'll happen with other casinos that open. So what kind of effect would that have?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm interested in it, and my hope is that this sort of studying quality of life picks some of that stuff up, right? I mean, people say, well, how can a casino benefit a community? And one of the ways that it certainly can is if the community gets to take tens of thousands or tens of millions of dollars from the community and pour it back into parks and schools and the rest of that, then we should see nicer communities pop up around casinos. So my hope is that this catches some of that at an aggregate level, but at an individual level, I don't have anything to distinguish it, but it might be interesting. First.
I have two questions.
Sure.
You talk about kind of the trade-off between tax revenues that you get from casinos and the high rate versus other forms of entertainment.
Right.
On a basic traditional level, have you looked at multipliers in terms of local multipliers in terms of casino development versus other forms of entertainment? Multipliers just basically on both sides versus casino development versus other types of entertainment. And two, I have a question about your model. Obviously, is there a hierarchical in your model since you have like two hierarchies?
No, it's just the fixed effects,
Okay.
standard fixed effects
Okay,
model.
so you're not looking at given that you have a casino embedded in a larger region?
No, it's not like a random effects. No, it's not
So you're not doing
hierarchical. No. I can comment a bit. I mean, so in terms of multipliers, are you talking about like job
Yeah, you
multipliers?
use some direct effect.
Yeah. There's work out there. It's not mine. There's work out there on that. I don't know.
It would be hard to ballpark. I mean, there is a lot of literature on what kind of other entertainment activity gets cannibalized. In fact, that's where a lot of this first cannibalization literature came from. Again, bowling alleys and movie theaters and that kind of stuff.
There's a fair bit out there on which kinds of industries are out there that are came. Mike Hicks has some stuff out there. There's some.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it's not mine. Yeah, but
Well, I think the issue is if it's the employment from each casino, then maybe your employment multiplier. That's,
Yeah.
and it's a relatively small number.
It's like 800,000. give or take.
It's irreducible,
Right,
yeah.
entertainment, it's gonna be very small.
Yeah, it's not going to be huge.
Versus, I was thinking in terms of like opportunity costs, like dollars spent in casino is not a dollar spent in another form of entertainment, would be a higher multiplier.
I mean, there's a job change story too. I mean, it depends on who's getting these jobs, and if it's someone who's been unemployed for.
one thing to say is that casinos pay relatively well. For the level of skill, the level of observable skills, casinos pay relatively well. Yeah, go ahead.
And the question, when you look at your quality of life, one of the arguments that the local communities, every community wants a casino, is because of the revenue. No matter how economically productive the casino is, that local community gets money.
Yeah.
And that's attractive to, whether it's Arlington Heights or Rosemont or Danville or anything else, an extra $1 million is a lot of money. If Harvard got another $2 million, they're going to be ecstatic, right? They don't care about anything else.
Actually, Chicago State gets some money from the Rivers Casino,
There's close.
like
But
2%,
that's
which really upsets me because our school is closer to displays of Chicago State, right? So we should be getting some of that. But again, that's how I get these things passed. But yeah.
I think the most troubling slide to me was your tricolored graph showing revenues that are going to be generated.
Ranks.
Yeah, that's really, I don't know what's that about. I mean, it's.
What was it towards the end?
No, the slide where you're predicting out forward that you couldn't explain why in the current bill the revenues are reduced, the take is reduced, right?
Oh, the tax rates.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, this is something that, I was looking for things to kind of talk about, to kind of introduce
Go
the
back.
expansion bill. Go to yours.
No, go back to the slide that he's talking about.
And
There.
it was shocking to me, so I thought I would show it to you guys, but to be honest, I haven't spent much time thinking about why.
For what it's worth, the only ones that are gonna get up here
Rivers and
are gonna be
Chicago.
Rivers and Chicago ones.
Yeah.
As a practical matter, that's what, you're gonna have to have.
So the other thing I was gonna say is that the employee-owned casino Queen, is that,
That's the East St. Louis casino, right? You think?
yeah, does the fact that it's employee-owned, does that benefit the local community to?
I didn't know it was employed.
Tribal casinos, one of the things that I'm working on now is trying to understand for tribal casinos, whether tribal casinos do better or worse when they have management contracts. Some tribal casinos are essentially tribal owned and operated. Some are tribal owned and operated by a casino operator, Harrah's, or there's some other ones that operate Indian casinos. And I don't know the answer to that for sure yet, but that's one of the things that's interesting. One thing that's certain is, I don't have it here. The introduction of a tribal casino, in this picture here, when we look at commercial casinos, the move is down and to the left. The move is towards a less productive place. With tribal casinos, the move is down and to the right. It's towards a more pleasant place, a higher amenity level place. And I think that that's part of the answer. I think that part of the answer is that when tribal casinos open, they get to keep profits local. When Harrah's opens a casino in Joliet, Harrah's, the profits, a bunch of it goes to the state, some of it goes to Joliet, a bunch of it goes to the state, and the rest goes to Harrah's corporate, which is not local. So my sense is that if tribal casinos are a good comparison for the employee-owned ones in St. Louis, then that would be the evidence that I have. Yes, sir.
Boy, I didn't know that there was employed.
Have you or other folks tried to look at the effect of the quality of casino jobs created on the quality of life in the communities and sort of how that plays a role?
The jobs. I guess that's probably built to Mike's estimate. No?
The quality of casino. The one thing that I have looked at is wages of casino employees, and casino employees appear to be paid a compensating differential for working in the casinos. How that spills over to other jobs, I don't know, but casino jobs generally pay pretty well. Part of that is a trust issue. To get people to work in the casinos that you can trust, there's a lot of evidence that trustworthiness and handling cash and things like that is something that earns people higher wages. But I think another part of that is for casinos to come to a town, they usually have to pay some sort of a bribe, and one of the bribes is usually we're going to create high-paying jobs. The Walmart story, I think, is, well, Walmart wants to come, and Walmart's going to pay $10.50 an hour to get the people to say, okay, you can put your Walmart here. And so I think there's at least some of that going on.
Yeah, I'm just interested in whether anyone's tried to quantify if your job pays $50 an hour versus 10, what added benefit is that to the community in terms of?
Her multiplier question, I think that presumably it should spill over to higher multipliers, but I don't know if that's true.
I'm sure there's literature out there on a casino.
Yeah, right. The indirect part should be higher.
Let's make this a little question.
I was just gonna say, that I have no idea about that, but one of the trends I noticed looking at all the gaming commission books for all of the surrounding areas, annually, you open a casino, whenever a new casino would open, there'd be a lot of, the highest level of employee numbers per casino, and the trend was always to go down. So, in that part, I would assume that it had to do with cannibalization whenever another casino was open somewhere else, but every year the employee numbers went down. So you're going to claim.
Maybe that's
part of it is a shift towards electronic gaming devices.
Yeah,
electronic gaming devices are wonderfully profitable.
Although these tax rates might change that a little.
That's true. Yeah, and I suspect that that's why we have the move on at a higher level. Is that we want to have more
tables.
We want to have more
Dealers.
Yeah.
And if there's online gaming in the bill, which looks like there might be, that also has a huge effect on communities. Because there's less people putting in the land base.
Potentially,
There's some literature out there on whether online gaming is a complement or substitute for casino gaming. Do I go to the casino for fun, get hooked on it, and go home and gamble online? So it's not entirely obvious that they're substitutes for each other. There's a lot of people out there that think Las Vegas is a complement for other kinds of gambling. rather than a substitute. But I don't know what the answer is. It's an interesting question.
I think you use the term cannibalizing, but I kind of think of what, there's small cannibalizing going on with the local people who go there and lose their money, and their household doesn't have the buying power that they had. And so, I guess that probably never factored in, but.
Well, no, I mean, that's what.
No, I mean,
I hope it is.
No, I mean, that's actually, in terms of their ability to spend money on other goods and services. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of, that's what people were first interested in studying when this whole notion of cannibalization started to kind of be studied, was, again, this what's the impact on, entertainment industry, and, again, movie theaters and restaurants, and there are large effects. I mean, absolutely. I mean, hands down, the more money you spend, at Rivers, the less money you're going to spend in other forms of entertainment. I think, and again, I speak from the revenue side, strictly, the fact that the rates are so much higher on casino gambling relative to these other, forms of entertainment means that the state doesn't see that as a problem. Now, I mean, if you're talking about, someone spending to the point where they, lose the house, I mean, that's a whole different story. But I mean, if you're just talking about, well, I spend, $50 at the casino as opposed to $50 at the movie theater, the state sees that as a net gain. It's different if we've got, problem gambling. That's a whole other animal.
Yeah, but the $50 at the local place could potentially be money that stays locally, and so there's a multiplier there, whereas money that goes away from gambling is not.
I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends on what the alternative source of spending is, or use of the resources is. I mean,
Yeah.
if I spend money, again, if I go to the movie theater and that's a corporate-owned movie theater, somewhere out there. So it gets tricky.
My story is that that's why this density issue matters. Is that when we put a casino in a place that's got lots of bars, movies, and restaurants, the dollars come from bars, movies, and restaurants. When we put it in a place that doesn't have anything else, the money probably comes from travelers coming to visit, or people who are spending their money on, or locals who are taking their business elsewhere, would drive to Terre Haute instead. I'm just thinking of places close to Danville. Drive over to Terre Haute to go have lunch rather than drive to the Danville casino.
And that's what makes the Chicago case so unique, is that, from Mike's story, there is so much density in Chicago, but a lot of that spending is going to come from out-of-towners, visiting McCormick Place, because of a convention. That's a whole other scenario that offsets a lot of that cannibalization story, at least locally, because the money's coming from out of state, out of region. So.
The paper I wrote some years ago on casino locations picked essentially the area around O'Hare as being the most likely place to attract a casino that didn't have one yet. This was 2008, 2009 paper. And his story is the same way, that the area around O'Hare, for lots of reasons, and the other paper was much more demographic, much more, what's the local population, like race and gender and income and things like that. The place where Rivers is maybe the very best spot in the world to drop a casino if you had to drop one. In terms of generating money. What's that?
Did you say Rivers?
Yeah, where they put Rivers.
Des Plaines
is.
Why is that?
Proximity to Chicago, proximity to O'Hare, high income people in the neighborhood.
It's dense.
It's dense.
It's not.
It's
super. It's not as close to the Indiana casinos, so it doesn't compete.
It's got the right sort of mix of the right sort of demographics for people who would patronize the casino and spend lots of money there.
A lot of commerce around there, all the tourists going after it.
I mean, Elgin isn't that close. Neither is Aurora. I mean, they're close.
Elgin's not. The Elgin Casino is a wildly good place to have a casino.
Elgin was the #1 spot prior to, and this has got killed.
Well, it makes total sense.
The reason that I asked that, because there, of course, is the Chicago River. There's land along the Chicago River that would support something like a casino, but it's still high density, which you're saying is an issue.
I'm sorry?
You're
It's
saying-
still high density?
Yes.
The locations paper was more, was more asking the question, where would the casino do well? Kind of like what Ryan's talking about. Where would the casino, where would you expect casinos to do very well? And where would you expect the local jurisdiction to be willing to take them? And that area around O'Hare was very much a place where the community you would have expected the community to want one, and you would have expected the casino operators to want to go there. Downtown, I don't know why they don't predict downtown locations as much as they do. Probably because there aren't many cases of downtown casinos. So the prediction is that for whatever reason, and again, that's something that's changed. It's something that in the last 4 or 5 years has changed with the ones in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. Those are much more, those are places you're going in central cities rather than suburbs or satellite cities.
Did you all ever consider the old post office?
No, as close as I can get to geography is the same Puma that covers Navy Pier, McCormick Place, the post office. All those, that's as close as I can get in terms of geography. What else is in there? The Thompson Center's been proposed as a place to put a casino. Well, it's got that huge open space, right? That seems like it just screams for something, but.
Okay, I think we're gonna wrap it up. So thank you for coming.
Yes,
Great.
thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.